4 times a year, combat aircraft from the United States and our allies participate in an exercise called Red Flag. Short of actual combat, this gives aircrew the most realistic training available anywhere in the world. Wars are now largely fought by alliances. Armed forces from many disparate nations fight as a team. Coordinated effort. Red Flag trains aircrew for just such an occurrence. Red Flag is the closest aircrew can get to actual war without dropping bombs or shooting down enemy aircraft. 4 times a year, combat aircraft from air forces all over the world descend on Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Over 2 weeks, their aircrews participate in an ultra-real training exercise. Operating as the Blue Force or Friendly Force, they take off and land within sight of the bright lights of Las Vegas. With few restrictions on flying, they are tested to their very limits. Opposing them is the Red Force, which consists of adversary aircraft to simulate those from potentially hostile air forces, as well as the world's densest concentration of air defense gun and missile systems for training. Crews from Britain and France may train in their own countries on ranges which have a few air defense systems, but nothing can compare to the sheer scale and complexity of the Red Flag ranges. Red Flag exercises have been running for 20 years, and throughout their existence have been recognized as the most realistic simulations of air combat available. Each new round of exercises reflects the changing world of air warfare, with new tactics and operational procedures involved. Red Flag started in 1975 as a reaction to some of the tactical failings of U.S. air power during the war in Southeast Asia. Today's Red Flag is the responsibility of the U.S. Air Force 414th Training Squadron, part of the Weapons and Tactics Center at Nellis. Red Flag's mission is to provide advanced, realistic, composite force training and to provide a forum for the exchange of ideas between the various participants. Studies of air combat revealed that crews became far more effective and, above all, survivable after they had completed their first 10 combat missions. An aim of Red Flag is to provide those 10 missions in the relative safety of an exercise, where the threats are realistically simulated rather than in the very dangerous heat of battle. Desert Storm was the proof of its success. That conflict highlighted the validity of composite force training. So each red flag includes disparate units from the U.S. forces and from overseas. Most of the missions involve large packages, something the average air crew will encounter in wartime but has little experience of in peacetime training. During Red Flag, air crew may not only plan their own individual missions, but also those for strike packages, which involve multinational crews and over 40 aircraft assets. Red Flag is one of 4 exercises in the Flag series. Maple Flag is another training exercise held in Western Canada. Green Flag is a U.S.-only exercise held at Nellis. This concentrates on electronic warfare, intelligence, and command and control. Blue Flag is a series of computer war games and combat simulations. The high-tech aspect of air warfare is taking on an ever-increasing importance. It is the intention to green up future Red Flag exercises by introducing special missions aircraft such as those conducting electronic warfare, command and control, and intelligence gathering. Desert Storm highlighted the importance of mission flexibility, and in particular, the ability to retarget aircraft in flight, as happened during the Scud hunting scenario. As part of the preparations for Desert Storm, a one-off Desert Flag was held in 1990 to prepare crews for the upcoming conflict. This concentrated on Iraqi adversary tactics, air tasking, medium-level bombing, and target identification. New targets were constructed in the Red Flag Range complex, including an oil refinery, Scud missiles, and a facsimile of an Iraqi airfield. Each Red Flag exercise lasts for 6 weeks and is divided into 3 two-week phases. Participating aircrew change over at the end of each phase. Stateside units usually bring their own aircraft with them, but the overseas participants generally leave the aircraft there for the duration while the crews swap over. The 2-week phase gives approximately 10 missions to each crew, which is considered the optimum number. Any fewer and the crew are still learning many lessons. Any more and they have reached saturation point. Red Flag is very intense. Each phase is structured so that the threat and complexity of the mission increase as the exercise progresses. Each day has 2 waves. This may consist of a day push at noon and a night push after 5 o'clock. The first day consists of a familiarization sortie around the range complexes. Even this mission involves a target attack. The first 3 days are used to work up to full operational capability. As each day progresses, minimum operating altitude decreases in steps from 500 feet with no ordnance on day 1 to 300 feet with inert ordnance on day 2. By day 3, it is possible to fly down to 100 feet and release live weapons. Similarly, the threats increase in capability. On day one, the adversary aircraft stay on the ground. On day two, they fly a Red Force mission against the Blue Force attackers, but using low capability aircraft, MiG-21s or 23s, and with third world tactics. Later, the Red Air Force aircraft get more sophisticated, MiG-29, Su-27, and the tactics may emulate those of a highly capable air arm with well-trained pilots. Ground threats also get more sophisticated as the exercise progresses, augmenting the airborne adversaries to present a realistic air defense environment in whatever scenario they are tasked. In addition to SAM and AAA radar threats, the air defense environment gears up to include communications jamming. At some point in the exercise, a realistic combat search and rescue exercise is also undertaken as part of the main package activities. One unsuspecting aircrew member is pulled out of his duties and put on a helicopter during one of the raids. He is deposited in the desert with his survival pack and emergency radio to simulate a downed airman. From this point, a full-scale rescue attempt is planned, which is executed the following day during the main strike. The rescue has to be fully integrated with the day's mission, with air cover assigned. The strike also has to contend with the Red Force, whose mission will be to hinder the rescue. Days 8, 9, and 10 of Red Flag are the culmination of all the lessons learned. The previous 7 exercises have been discrete one-day scenarios, attacking targets as diverse as power plants and airfields. The final 3 days are a rolling air campaign with kill removals. As happens in a real war, this means that if you are shot down by the air defenses, you are removed from the scene.
Foot ceiling with 5 miles a minute, altimeter 3015.
This highlights the importance of suppressing and killing air defenses on the first day, rolling back the defenses until by the last day of the campaign, the Blue Forces should be in a position to operate in the attack role to great effect. The Red Force is assigned a theoretical number of assets, and as these are destroyed, be they fighter aircraft or radar sites, they are not employed again for the duration of the campaign. In reality, there are only a small number of actual aircraft assigned to the Red Force, so when killed in air combat, they initially fly off to a regeneration box before they can re-enter the fray as a different fighter.
40 seconds.
However, the number of dead aircraft the Red Force can regenerate is limited by the exercise staff. If they are assigned 36 fighters at the start of the campaign, and then there follow 36 kills by Blue Force, then the Reds are now out of fighters. Most participants at Red Flag are American, but a sizable minority come from overseas. The exercise held in November 1996 shows how diverse these are. DC-138 Hercules came down from Davis Mountain in Arizona. This is the electronic warfare version, codenamed Compass Call. Other heavy metal included KC-135R tankers, Royal Air Force VC-10 tanker transport. And B-1B heavy bombers. Fast movers included F-117 Nighthawk stealth attack aircraft from Holloman in New Mexico. F-4F Phantom interceptors from Germany. A-10 Warthog tank busters. F-15 Eagle strike aircraft and interceptors, including a squadron from Alaska. And the ubiquitous F-16. After the British, France has been the most active overseas participant at Red Flag. Among the aircraft recently deployed by the Armée de l'Air have included Mirage 2000s in both interceptor and 2000N K2 strike versions. Just as diverse a range of combat aircraft can also be found at each Maple Flag exercise. This is held at Cold Lake in Alberta, Western Canada. Apart from CF-5 fighters from the Canadian Armed Forces, other participants in 1993 included U.S. Navy and Canadian Hornets, U.S. Air Force F-16s, French F-1s, and the British Jaguars. Maple Flag is tailored to simulate the Central European scenario. The Cold Lake ranges are not instrumented, but the different terrain makes for an excellent training environment. Just like at Red Flag, the U.S. Air Force F-16 adversaries from Nellis deploy to Canada to make life harder for the participants. The Armée de l'Air was a major contributor to the air power present at this particular exercise in 1993. Alongside combat Renaissance Mirage F-1CRs, it also sent Jaguar A interdictor strike aircraft. Nellis and its environs are well situated to conduct Red Flag exercises. There's an interesting variety of terrain. Flying conditions are almost ideal for most of the year, and the airspace has no major civilian air routes. The ranges are also by far the most comprehensively instrumented in the world. The Red Flag participants are not the only aircraft flying in the area. The Nevada desert is sparsely populated and thus secure. For these reasons, it is widely believed that the U.S. Air Force continues to conduct some of its most secret test programs here. Red Flag is conducted over a massive slice of Nevada, some 12,000 square miles of airspace on top of over 2,500 square miles of bombing range. Over 1,400 targets are located in the vast range complex. These comprise a wide variety of industrial complexes, airfields with aircraft targets, SAM sites, AAA batteries, and a good many other types. The airspace consists of a rough triangle with Nellis at its southern apex. In the center of the triangle is a highly restricted no-go area known as the box. This is where the U.S. Air Force and other agencies are believed to undertake highly classified black programs from the Groom Lake Test Complex. Groom Lake Base itself is not officially recognized, much less the activities there, which are rumored to range from captured MiGs through Mach 5 spy planes to flight tests of extraterrestrial aircraft. Red flag crews keep well away from the box, for to transgress its airspace by even a few yards results in instant expulsion from the exercise, and no doubt a thoroughly unpleasant debriefing. Running south and west from the box is further restricted airspace, protecting the Nevada test site. This contains the areas of Frenchman, Jackass, and Yucca Flats, and Paiute Mesa, where the U.S. Department of Energy has conducted most of the U.S. nuclear tests since January 1951. Other no-go airspace surrounds the former F-117 base at Tonopah Test Range in the northwest corner of the ranges. The eastern and northern sections of the airspace are made up of MOAs, military operating areas, where the jets are restricted to supersonic flight above 5,000 feet only. These restrictions aside, the Nellis Range complex still provides some of the world's most clear airspace for unrestricted combat flying, and it is used to the full during the Red Flag campaign. For a participating squadron in a Red Flag exercise, the work starts many weeks before. Each squadron usually sends its most capable and experienced air crews. For example, Royal Air Force Tornado Strike crews all have at least 500 hours of fast jet time. Once in Las Vegas, there is little time to acclimatize before training starts in earnest. Each mission begins with an in-depth briefing. There are mass briefings of all participants, where unit assignments are given and overall intelligence briefed. And there are briefings at unit level, where the details of the strike are given. On each mission, there are assigned mission leaders, package leaders, and flight leaders. Due to their smaller size, the Royal Air Force and the Armée de l'Air bring to Red Flag their flexibility of operations, which makes their package planning excellent. However, there is much to learn from the hosts at Nellis, for the Americans are regarded as the only people who can put together and run the really big missions. As in any exercise, detailed and accurate feedback is essential to maximize aircrew training and learning. When exercises are conducted on such a grand scale, you need to have exact knowledge at all times of what's happening with all aircraft in flight. The Red Flag Measurement and Debriefing System, RFMDS, makes this possible. Installed in 1986, the RFMDS consists of a pod carried by each aircraft which downlinks key flight and weapons data to ground stations. Relayed to a central computer, all this data is processed to provide a complete visual display of the mission. RFMDS tracks up to 36 high-activity aircraft. Those in the target area are engaged in air combat, and a further 100 low-activity aircraft. It also shows missile launches from both ground and air, aircraft altitude, speeds, armament status, and relation to other aircraft. The basic display shows the entire target range area, with major terrain features. On this is overlaid the tracks and positions of the players, presented in different colors for easy identification. When the mission is complete, the learning is far from over. With RFMDS post-action analysis, mission performances are no longer a matter of educated guesses or fragmentary knowledge. Before such systems were introduced, it was the biggest guy with the loudest voice who won the debriefing. The simulated firing of missiles can be scored by the RFMDS to judge whether they were successful. Aircraft performance is recorded in extensive detail and can be played back in demonstrable and dramatic visual form to determine who really won the battle. Preparation for each red flag hop is just the same as for any other mission, involving the same routines and checks. The important difference is that the pace of operations for aircrew is much more intense than they would normally encounter at routine squadron level. The aim of Red Flag is to cycle each aircrew through 10 missions in each 2-week period. The first day of the exercise is a familiarization ride to allow crews to orient themselves with the geography around the Nellis complex. Red Flag tests both air and ground crews. It provides the latter with an opportunity to practice rapid turnarounds between sorties and to work with live weapons in the latter part of the exercise. Due to the intense pace, aircraft must be turned around quickly for the next push. This involves rearming the aircraft and ensuring that they are fully fit to fly. Crews must also quickly familiarize themselves with the airfield procedures around Nellis. With up to 60 aircraft launching and recovering in 2 pushes each day, the scale of Red Flag is far greater than most aircrews have ever encountered during regular squadron operations. As the exercise progresses, they fly ever more demanding sorties in terms of complexity and threats encountered, including 6 one-day attack missions. The culmination of all the lessons learned is tested during the final phase, a 3-day rolling air campaign. overseas pilots taking part in Red Flag, what are the benefits of such training? A senior Royal Air Force commander sums up the two main advantages of British participation as, firstly, the ability to train in an unrestricted environment, down to as low as 100 feet with a full range of air and ground threats. And secondly, the ability to operate in full combined air operations environment, with a wide variety of aircraft types in high-intensity operations, just as one would expect in wartime. And that is what Red Flag is all about. It takes crews from a wide range of units and from different air arms, puts them together, gives them a common mission, and watches them learn from each other. It builds a team which emerges after 2 weeks as a fully integrated and awesomely powerful air power package.
During Operation Crossroads in 1946, a B-29 Superfortress heavy bomber dropped a single weapon on Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. The test, involving over 30 warships and US sailors, showed the awesome, hellish power of the atomic weapon. America's strategic bomber force remains the most awesome military power in the world. The long-range bombers of the U.S. Air Force Strategic Air Command kept the peace for 45 years. The proud motto of SAC Airmen was, "Peace is our profession." They kept the peace by wielding the big stick, the threat of massive nuclear retaliation. They flew a range of bombers, each bigger, faster, and even more capable than its predecessor. The first were piston-engine-powered B-29s. These were replaced by the enormous B-36 Peacemaker with 10 engines, 6 piston, and 4 jet. Near supersonic performance came with the B-47 Stratojet, which ushered in the jet era. Its replacement was the 8-jet B-52 Stratofortress, equipped with nuclear missiles. True supersonic performance, a top speed of over Mach 2, came with the B-58 Hustler and the swing-wing FB-111A. But bombers were only part of the story. SAC was also responsible for America's intercontinental ballistic missiles. These ranged from the early Atlas and Thor missiles through the Titan II and the more advanced Minuteman. The latest is the MX Peacemaker, able to strike within meters of multiple targets. 3 bombers currently make up the U.S. Strategic Bomber Force: the veteran B-52 Stratofortress, the supersonic B-1B Lancer, and the B-2 Spirit, the stealth bomber. These bombers were designed with just one mission: to carry America's airborne nuclear deterrent. The concept of strategic bombing was truly developed during World War II. In the European theater, formation raids of up to 1,000 Flying Fortress and Liberator bombers of the U.S. Army Air Corps rained down millions of bombs on the Third Reich. In association with Britain's night bombers, the largest armada of warplanes the world would ever see smashed the Nazi ability to wage war. In the Pacific theater, the island-hopping campaign allowed massive B-29 Superfortress bombers to carry the war to the Japanese mainland. Operating from huge bases at Tinian, Saipan, and Guam in the Marianas Islands, they pulverized Japanese cities by day and night in massive raids. The Superfortress was the most advanced aircraft of World War II. The B-29, the U.S. Army Air Force, finally had a bomber which could carry a sufficient bomb load over a great enough distance to produce significant results. The round trip to Japan from the Marianas was nearly 5,000 kilometers. After crossing the Japanese coastline, B-29 navigators often used Mount Fuji as a waypoint to confirm their position. The air defenses they encountered were fanatical, but the awesome weapons of the Superfortress, 10 machine guns which gave the aircraft its name, shot down many Japanese fighters. Raids of up to 300 superfortresses at a time struck at the Japanese capacity and will to wage war. Key industrial cities hit included Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, and Kawasaki, as well as nearly 60 smaller urban areas. The B-29 struck by day and by night. One particular weapon, the incendiary bomb, caused immense devastation. During one raid alone against Tokyo, the incendiaries dropped by the B-29 set up huge firestorms which completely engulfed the largely wooden Japanese homes and buildings. A quarter of the city was incinerated, and over 120,000 inhabitants were either killed or injured. Meanwhile, aerial mines reduced shipping to a trickle and virtually cut off all supplies to Japan. But America had a secret weapon which would end the war at a stroke. On the 6th of August 1945, the B-29, nicknamed Enola Gay, dropped the world's first atomic bomb on the coastal Japanese city of Hiroshima. The little boy weapon, which had the equivalent explosive power of 20,000 tons of high explosive, blew the city out of existence. As many as 130,000 people are estimated to have perished in the ensuing fireball, and many more would die later of radiation-related illnesses. Japan reeled at the shock, but refused to yield. A second weapon, the Fat Man, was dropped 3 days later by B-29 Bockscar, causing a second distinctive mushroom cloud to appear over Nagasaki. Japan surrendered unconditionally 5 days after, and World War II was over. But the atomic bomb had utterly changed the world. Far-sighted politicians and military men recognized the fact that the balance of power in the world was now held by those who had the A-bomb, and they planned accordingly. One of America's first steps was to set up a long-range bomber force. On the 31st of March, 1946, the Strategic Air Command was born. Its primary aim, deterrence of aggression by the threat of massive nuclear retaliation. And the main enemy was now communism, inspired by the Soviet Union and her allies. Relations between East and West deteriorated so much that the wartime alliance quickly broke down and evolved into a hostility which became known as the Cold War. One of the first confrontations was the blockade of the German capital Berlin by Soviet forces. The Allies organized a massive airlift to resupply the city. The newly formed US Air Force also sent a force of B-29s to Europe to deter further Soviet aggression. America's lead in nuclear weapons wouldn't last long. Within 4 years of the end of World War II, the USSR exploded her first atomic device. And later, in that same year, came another shock. China underwent a communist revolution. Suddenly, America had two new enemies, both vast and distant. But the remnants of her wartime B-29 bomber force lacked numbers, speed, operating height, and range. As an interim, Boeing developed an improved version as the B-50, but what was needed was a bomber which could hit targets anywhere in the USSR with a single large nuclear weapon. The ability to carry a large payload over intercontinental distances meant that the new bombers would have to be big. And SAC had the answer in an aircraft originally developed to bomb Germany from the USA. It's doubtful if any bomber in history was more impressive than the thundering Convair B-36 Peacemaker. Everything about it was big. With a takeoff weight of 185 tons, the B-36 was larger than any other bomber that had ever flown. It remains the world's largest operational warplane. The wingspan, at just over 70 meters, was greater than the distance flown by the Wright brothers during man's first powered flight in 1903. Power was provided by 6 massive piston engines buried in the wings and facing rearwards. Later, B-36s boosted this power with twin-podded jet engines under each wing, so that there were 10 engines, 6 turning and 4 burning. The B-26 needed every bit of power available to get airborne. The B-36's 50-meter fuselage earned it the nickname the Big Stick. It was so long that there was a communications tunnel linking the fore and aft crew compartments. The latter housed the stations of the rear and side gunners. The B-36 had such a long endurance that rest bunks were provided here for a relief crew. For self-defense, the B-36 bristled with 20mm cannon. It carried 16 of them, paired in 8 remote-controlled gun turrets. 4 weapons bays could carry a total bomb load of 20 tons. The normal bomb load was much smaller, around 4 tons, or 1 large nuclear weapon of similar weight. The first peacemakers entered service with SAC bomber wings in 1948, and they were joined by nearly 400 more. In due course, they equipped 11 SAC bomber or strategic reconnaissance wings until 1959. B-36s dropped America's first hydrogen bomb, a weapon of even greater destructive power than the atomic weapon. It was with B-36s that SAC refined the system of airborne alerts. During any 24-hour period, SAC always had several nuclear bombers airborne, ready to launch at short notice in case of surprise attacks. The bombers constantly practiced simulated long-range attacks against American cities. But the reconnaissance versions carried out their snooping missions for real, flying close to and reportedly over the Soviet Union in ultra-long missions lasting over 40 hours. As the B-36 was intended to strike at targets thousands of kilometers away, no fighter existed with the range to protect it from enemy air attack. Thus was born the FICON project, one of the strangest aviation concepts ever seen. FICON stood for Fighter Conveyor and involved the carriage of a Republic F-84 fighter in the B-36's weapons bay. The fighter was launched and retrieved by means of a complex trapeze. Both operations demanded great skill on the part of the fighter pilot. Tests were carried out in 1952. This system actually entered limited service in 1955, but was withdrawn less than a year later. The thundering Big Stick served SAC well and kept the peace for over 10 years. But it was now time to make way for the jet age. Just as its B-29 predecessor had done 7 years previously, the B-47 Stratojet introduced another quantum leap in bomber aviation. First flying in December 1947, the Stratojet was the world's first swept-wing jet bomber. It had outstanding performance, combining the range and payload of a bomber with jet fighter speed. The B-47 began to equip SAC bomber units in 1951 and would form the backbone of the service well into the mid-1960s. The elegant 6-jet medium bomber was deployed to SIT nuclear alert duties all over the world. Takeoff performance was often assisted in spectacular fashion by booster rockets, which were jettisoned in flight. Mass production delivered nearly 2,300 B-47s, equipping no less than 36 operational SAC wings. The design showed great versatility, with the B-47 serving in bomber, reconnaissance, electronic warfare, and test roles. But even as the B-47 was entering operational service, Boeing had already planned on its drawing boards a truly heavy bomber. The massive 8-jet B-52 Stratofortress had been America's most important post-war bomber. Entering service in 1956, it gave SAC a bomber with a truly effective global reach. First and foremost, a strategic bomber, the B-52's main weapons during the 1950s consisted of free-fall thermonuclear bombs. This is the Mark 15 weapon, nicknamed Zombie. In May 1956, this bomb was dropped in Operation Red Wing on the Pacific island at Bikini Atoll. Similar, but even bigger, was the monster Mark 17, which had a 25 megaton warhead, equivalent to over 1,000 times more power than the Little Boy weapon dropped on Hiroshima. the fiercely disciplined SAC aircrew sat alert duty, ready to scramble their nuclear bombers at short notice. They practiced and were tested on their abilities to perform METOs, minimum interval takeoffs, when the ground would tremble and the air would be filled with thick black smoke from the water-boosted jet engines as the B-52s thundered skyward. By the early 1960s, the increased Soviet air defense threat led to the introduction of standoff weapons to supplement free-fall bombs. From 1961 to 1976, the B-52 carried the GAM-77 Hound Dog missile. Powered by a single turbojet, it could deliver a 1-megaton warhead over 800 kilometers from launch. The GAM-87A Skybolt was a joint US-British weapon of the late 1950s. Intended to be dropped by SAC's B-52s and RAF V-bombers, Skybolt was an air-launched ballistic missile. It was tested but never entered service as the project was later cancelled. To confuse enemy radars, B-52s also carried the GAM-72 Quail decoy missile. When SAC bombers went to war once more, it was not to drop nuclear weapons in anger against the Soviet Union, but to conduct a conventional bombing campaign in Southeast Asia. Operating from bases in Thailand and Guam in the Pacific, SAC B-52s pounded Viet Cong and North Vietnamese targets relentlessly in Arclight and Linebacker raids. From 1965 to 1972, they dropped millions of tons of bombs on the steaming jungles of Vietnam. By the time the B-52 had completely replaced the Stratojet as the main SAC bomber, another aircraft had brought the service into the supersonic age. The design and development of the world's first operational supersonic strategic bomber was one of the greatest challenges in aviation history. The B-58 Hustler's sophisticated design took huge risks. Under the very thin Delta wing hung 4 pods housing the newly developed J-79 jet engine. The Hustler had no bomb bay. Instead, nuclear weapons and fuel were carried in giant pods under the fuselage. The prototype first flew in November 1956, and from the start of the service in 1960, the bomber was a winner. Hustlers were very noisy, very complex, and very demanding to fly, but they offered fantastic performance, with a top speed of over Mach 2, to demonstrate the bomber's impressive capabilities to the world, including no doubt the watching Soviet Union. The first SAC wing set more than 19 world records for speed, altitude, and carrying payload to altitude. Supersonic flights were made in the USA, as well as between the US and London, Paris, and Tokyo. The London-Tokyo flight in October 1963 was made at an average speed of 1,500 kilometers per hour, but the Hustler's complexity made it extremely expensive to buy and to operate. Just 116 examples of this fantastic machine were built, and in 1970, the 2 wings were disbanded. Throughout the 1950s, combat aircraft designers sought to produce machines which would fly higher and faster. The North American XB-70 Valkyrie was to be the bomber immune from interception. The design of the B-58 could be seen as the cutting edge of its day. That of the XB-70 took this even further into the realms of science fiction. Made largely of stainless steel, the graceful Valkyrie made its maiden flight in September 1964. A Canard Delta design with twin tails, it was the most powerful warplane ever flown. While the Hustler was capable of twice the speed of sound, the Valkyrie's 6 engines, burning ethylene fuel, would allow it to cruise at Mach 3 at altitudes well above anything Soviet fighters could reach. Added stability at high speeds the wingtips folded down. Tests proved the Valkyrie's amazing performance, but the project, an engineering marvel, was doomed. Advances in Soviet surface-to-air missiles negated the concept of high-altitude bombing and led to a change of tactics. But the cost of strengthening the airframe to tolerate the increased stresses of low-level flight were deemed prohibitive. The final nail in the coffin came in 1966. One of two Valkyrie prototypes was destroyed when a chase plane crashed into it on a test flight. Eventually, the whole astronomically expensive project was cancelled. Penetrating Soviet defenses remained a key SAC problem, and this was solved in part by the General Dynamics FB-111, a version of the Air Force's swing-wing tactical bomber. Its main role was to spearhead the way for the main attack force of larger American bombers by carrying out high-accuracy strikes against small, high-priority targets, primarily enemy defenses. It was armed with free-fall nuclear bombs or up to 6 SRAM nuclear attack missiles. Very fast, but needing aerial refueling to reach Soviet targets, the FB-111 equipped 2 SAC wings until the early 1990s. While efforts were made and failed to replace the vulnerable B-52, it continued to serve SAC faithfully, albeit with new attack, navigation, and defensive systems and weapons. An electro-optical TV sensor and FLIR are mounted in 2 bulges under the cockpit. Together with a terrain-following radar, the system allows the B-52 to fly and navigate at low level, 150 meters and below, at night and in adverse weather. The B-52 was now designed to attack fully zipped up, flying low level and entirely on instruments. Although free-fall bombs are carried, standoff weapons have assumed a greater importance. Used primarily by FB-111s, the Boeing AGM-69 SRAM short-range attack missile can also be carried by the B-52 to suppress enemy defenses at ranges of up to 200 kilometers. The main standoff precision attack weapon is the Boeing AGM-86B ALCM, air-launched cruise missile. 6 can be carried under each wing, plus a further 8 internally on a rotary launcher. The missile is basically a small unmanned aircraft with wings which flick out after launch. Powered by a small turbojet engine, it navigates at low level for up to 2,500 kilometers by means of inertial guidance, updated by a terrain contour matching system, a version where the conventional instead of nuclear warhead was used in Desert Storm. SAC operations with the B-52 saw an expansion of its capabilities and missions. Until the mid-1990s, the B-52G and H had 3 main roles: standoff nuclear attack, conventional power projection, and maritime operations. In the conventional bombing role, they carried over 40 kinds of free-fall bombs, mines, and torpedoes, as well as Harpoon anti-ship and conventional cruise missiles. However, the diminished threat resulting from the breakup of the USSR led to a reappraisal of the roles of all US strategic bombers. By 1995, all G-model B-52s had been retired, leaving the H as the sole operational version. Under the new SIOP, Single Integrated Operational Plan, or American War Fighting and Targeting Plans, the 94 surviving B-52Hs will form the main airborne nuclear deterrent. Efforts to replace the B-52 began in the mid-1960s. These had taken shape in the form of the Rockwell B-1, which was to have a long and troubled development. The swing-wing B-1A, which first flew in 1974, was designed as a high-altitude nuclear attacker capable of Mach 2. But that would have been suicide in the face of modern missile defenses. Instead, it would penetrate Soviet defenses at high speed and ultra-low level, jamming radars with its sophisticated countermeasures and defensive systems. but the high cost of the program led to its cancellation in 1977 by US President Carter, who ordered only limited development work to be continued with the 4 prototypes. During further tests, the B-1A would demonstrate that it was a truly awesome machine. It combined the speed and terrain-following capability of the FB-111A, coupled with the load-carrying ability and range performance similar to the B-52. Eventually, the program was reinstated by President Reagan, and the revised B-1B was rolled out in 1984. Simplified intakes were one of the many changes. The mission was now low-altitude penetration, and the new bomber also had many stealth features. In service from 1986, 100 B-1Bs became SAC's primary nuclear bombers. The 3 internal bomb bays and external racks can theoretically take up to a staggering 60 tons of weapons. These range from ordinary and advanced cruise missiles and SRAM to B-28, B-61 and B-83 free-fall nuclear bombs. The fall of the Soviet Union has seen the B-1's mission undergo a thorough re-evaluation. Originally a strategic weapon, the 94 surviving B-1Bs now form the US Air Force main long-range conventional bombers. Looking like no other flying machine ever built, the B-2 stealth bomber is an extremely bold attempt to produce a strategic bomber able to avoid enemy defenses by being all but invisible to radar. Details of the secret design were finally shown at the rollout in 1989. The internal structure and the curvaceous flying wing shape dissipate, deflect or trap radar energy rather than to reflect it back to hostile radars. Northrop first proposed flying wing bombers for SAC after World War II in the form of the unsuccessful XB-35 and the XB-49 designs. Over 40 years later, the advent of supercomputers finally made these a practical reality. Designed largely by computer, the B-2 uses a high proportion of composite materials in its construction. However, this cutting-edge technology is also extremely expensive. At over $1 billion apiece, the B-2 is the world's most expensive combat aircraft ever. Original plans called for 132 bombers, but these have been drastically cut to just 20 aircraft. By mid-1996, 9 were in service. Their ability to attack undetected makes them the US Air Force's silver bullets, to be used only against the highest priority targets. Supporting the bomber force throughout the Cold War were tankers and reconnaissance aircraft. Command and control was provided by EC-135 Looking Glass airborne relay platforms, which transmitted the President's order to fire the land-based ICBMs to SAC personnel underground missile silos. If necessary, the commander could also fire the missiles remotely from the aircraft. Strategic reconnaissance was a key role, and much effort has been made to obtain intelligence on targets such as Soviet ballistic missile sites. As the disposition of the Soviet Union military was largely unknown, so pre-strike reconnaissance became essential for mission planning. The main intelligence gathering aircraft used have been the Lockheed U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird. Boeing RC-135 electronic and signals intelligence snoopers flew close to Soviet territory, listening in on communications. Throughout the Cold War, the forces of both East and Western alliances went to the very highest states of alert on several occasions, stopping just short of a full nuclear exchange. What follows is the ultimate nightmare scenario when the forces of Armageddon are unleashed. It begins with the steady deterioration of relations between East and West. SAC reconnaissance aircraft begin to gather pre-strike intelligence about targets such as Soviet command bunkers. American air defense radars pick up massed formations of Soviet bombers taking off and preparing to approach from over the North Pole. The bombers may be recalled, but as all negotiations fail, the ultimate horror has materialized. The world falls into the abyss of all-out nuclear war. The first step is to order the Looking Glass commander airborne as quickly as possible. At SAC bases throughout the US, aircrew already at full alert receive the order to scramble. The president has finally let slip the dogs of war. over 45 years, the highly professional US strategic bomber crews have trained for nuclear war. Thankfully, they've never been called upon to carry out their mission. US strategic bombers have formed the single most powerful military force the world has ever seen. Flying bombers, which have become progressively faster, more complex, more capable, and more expensive, they have arguably kept the peace for over 4 decades by deterring aggression with the threat of massive nuclear retaliation. Today, the reduction in global tension between the two superpowers has seen a change in that strategic role. The US bomber forces are geared towards greater flexibility and fly a wide range of conventional missions. However, their principal task remains power projection, the ability to strike at targets far away with massive conventional or nuclear weapons. For this mission, they have no equal in the world.